Chapter 456. Lin Yun felt sad when she heard that. Her son was born into a wealthy family. Even when Tang Jiyuan had an affair, he did not beg his father. When it was his turn to meet Pei Chichi, he became like this. He must have suffered a lot at Pei Chichi's hands. Lin Yun loved her son. After a while, she said in a normal tone, "I won't interfere, but I can't guarantee that your grandfather will be fine." Her son had been gone for so many years. Actually, her hatred was not that strong. But Jinrong was still lying there. Perhaps he would never wake up in this lifetime. Old Master Lin would definitely not agree. If Tang Yu insisted on this matter, Sheng Yuan would be in turmoil in the future. Although she and Tang Jiyuan had painstakingly built Sheng Yuan for more than 20 years, and Tang Yu had spent the past few years, many of the higher-ups in Sheng Yuan were old subordinates of Old Master Lin. It would not benefit Yu Sheng Yuan to fall out with the old man. Tang Yu knew all this even if she did not say it. After a while, he straightened up and smiled. Of course. Lin Yun was a little unwilling. She glared at him. "Don't think that I'm giving you my blessing." After saying that, she snorted lightly and arrogantly went upstairs. Tang Yu stood downstairs for a while. He took out a cigarette and smoked. He did not feel relieved. Instead, he felt guilty. How could he not know that he had made things difficult for his mother today? Lin Yun had hated Zhao Ku for so many years. But today, she had given in for him. Tang Yu finished his cigarette and called a young maid over. He gave her some instructions and walked out. When he walked out, he saw a black limousine slowly driving into the courtyard. He recognized it at a glance. It was Tang Jiyuan's car. Tang Yu called the young maid over. "Has Mr. Tang been coming here often?" The young maid nodded vigorously. Her expression was a little strange. "I've been here a few times. I even met Mr. Zhao once." "Zhao Yi?" Tang Yu smiled faintly and waved the young maid away. He could almost imagine how black Tang Jiyuan's face would be when he ran into Zhao Yi. It seemed that his mother might not have the time to care about his affairs. Dealing with two men was already tiring enough. The fact that Zhao Yi could come here, instead of being satisfied with the company's monthly meeting, meant that he had already made up his mind. Maybe Tang Jiyuan's divorce triggered him. That's fine too. Perhaps his mother was forced by Tang Jiyuan to the point where she had no choice but to do what she wanted. With this in mind, Tang Yu walked up to Tang Jiyuan. Tang Jiyuan's gaze fell on Tang Yu's face, and he was a little surprised. After a while, he said, "Why are you leaving now? It's getting late, why don't you stay for dinner?" His tone sounded like that of the male host. Tang Yu only felt that it was a little ironic. After betraying someone for more than 10 years, could feelings be mended so easily? He felt that Tang Jiyuan had returned alive. "I still have something to do later." He rejected her flatly. He didn't want to get involved in his parents' affairs. He also believed that his mother could handle it well. Tang Jiyuan paused for a moment, as if he just remembered something. "Tang Yu, you should break up with that Pei Chichi. Your mother is upset these days." Tang Yu paused, and a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. "It's never Pei Chichi who makes her upset." With that, he left quickly. Chapter 457. There was no one in the living room. He asked the little girl and found out that Lin Yun was upstairs. Tang Jiyuan tidied himself up and slowly went upstairs. The little girl muttered downstairs, "He's not as good as Mr. Zhao." Also, she could tell that Madame Zhao liked Mr. Zhao to come over. Although there was nothing out of the ordinary, just drinking tea and talking about Buddhist scriptures, it was all good. But how did talking about Buddhist scriptures sublimate into talking about love? Every time Mr. Tang came, he was forcing Madame to remarry him. Madame was unwilling, but Mr. Tang would shamelessly come again and beg again. She felt that she had no respect for Tang Jiyuan and looked down on him. Tang Jiyuan didn't know what a little girl thought of him. All he wanted now was to remarry Lin Yun. When he got upstairs, there was no sound. He pushed open her bedroom door and saw Lin Yun resting on the bed. She was lying with her back facing him, one hand on her waist and the other under her head. The light green qipao outlined her figure well, especially her back, which was very graceful and especially charming. Although Zhao Ku's 3 measurements were outstanding, they were still a bit loose, unlike Lin Yun's indifferent, as if she hadn't changed all these years. Tang Jiyuan was a bit moved. He walked over and hugged her from behind. His slightly hot lips touched the skin behind Lin Yun's neck, and he called out Yun Yun in a hoarse voice. Lin Yun was a bit tired today and felt like she was in a dream. The back of her neck was kissed, a bit hot, a bit warm, it was very comfortable. The long-lost feeling ignited her body. Lin Yun didn't move, letting the man behind her kiss her. The kiss went down, touching her shoulders. A pair of warm hands began to unbuckle her front, and his fingers almost pulled off the buttons because they were too eager. Tang Jiyuan was really excited. He hadn't hugged Lin Yun for more than 10 years, and he couldn't help himself. They had been married for more than 10 years, and he had never been so excited. She was no longer young, but her body and skin still gave people a very tight feeling, which was a unique body shape of a regular life. Tang Jiyuan's arm firmly hooked around her waist, and he pulled open her collar a bit with one hand, kissing her more and more. Lin Yun felt as if she was surrounded by hot water, bobbing up and down. She couldn't tell if it was day or night. She didn't want to wake up either. When the man's finger slowly moved downwards, Lin Yun woke up a little and called out softly, "Zhao Yi." These 2 words seemed to have sent Tang Jiyuan into the 18th level of hell. When he was kissing her and wanting to do that kind of thing with her, she was thinking of Zhao Yi. Tang Jiyuan's face was extremely ugly. He turned over and held down his charming ex-wife. Lin Yun's clothes were half undone. Her hair, which was usually tied up, was now undone, spreading on the snow-white pillow. It was an indescribable sight. Tang Jiyuan just watched, his heart surging with anger. "Yun Yun, you and Zhao Yi, what's going on?" Lin Yun was now fully awake. She knew that she had accidentally called out Zhao Yi's name. This was also good. It also made Tang Jiyuan give up on this idea. She just laid there beautifully, looking at him with a hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "It's about what happened just now." Tang Jiyuan placed his finger on her neck. "Did you do it with him?" Chapter 458. Lin Yun was still lying there calmly. She didn't admit or deny it. She just asked him, "What does it have to do with you, Mr. Tang?" Tang Jiyuan was slightly stunned, and then he was a little annoyed. Yes, he was her ex-husband, not her legal husband, so she could openly flirt with that brat Zhao Yi, wasn't that right? He was furious, so he pulled Lin Yun's clothes and kissed her crazily. Lin Yun was shocked. She looked up, broke free, and pulled his hair. "Tang Jiyuan, you're crazy." He kissed her neck and said angrily, "Yes, I'm crazy. Yin Yun, I'm going to make you mine today." What an awesome excuse tilde. Almost half of Lin Yun's clothes were torn. Tang Jiyuan's eyes were bloodshot. He wanted her too much, and he was too afraid to lose her. He kissed her crazily, and his voice was intermittent. "Yun Yun, tell me, you're mine." He was afraid that Zhao Yi would chase her away. He was afraid that she would say that she had slept with Zhao Yi. Tang Jiyuan was almost crazy. Perhaps he could be with Zhao Ku all these years because Lin Yun hadn't remarried. If she had, he would have shot that man. He kissed her crazily, but Lin Yun pushed him away and raised her hand to slap him. She used all her strength in that slap. It was a hot slap on Tang Jiyuan's face. He was stunned. After calling out to Yun Yun, he sat up and looked at Lin Yun blankly. Lin Yun sat up and leaned against the headboard. She looked at Tang Jiyuan coldly. "Mr. Tang, you're not drunk today, are you?" He was a little bored. He touched his face and said solemnly, "Yun Yun, let's get married again, okay?" "I didn't mean that." Lin Yun buttoned up her clothes, but realized that she couldn't do it because he had torn half of it. She didn't care about the clothes anymore. She looked at him and said calmly, "Jiyuan, we're in the past. I don't have feelings for you for more than 10 years. Is it because of Zhao Yi?" he asked urgently. Lin Yun didn't say anything. She just sat there and looked at him. After a long time, she sighed and said, "Jiyuan, you're still the same as when we first got married. Impulsive, like a child." Tang Jiyuan's heart ached when he heard this. When he and Lin Yun first got married, they were really, really happy. Only in front of Lin Yun could he act like a child. He recalled that he was indeed the dominant figure in front of Jiao Ku. Jiao Ku had once served him so tenderly, and he had fallen into her arms and lost the child in his heart. Tang Jiyuan's voice trembled. Yunyun, I'm back. Do you still want me? Lin Yun leaned there quietly and said after a while, I don't want to. Her voice was soft and firm, but it was like a small hammer pounding on his heart. It was very painful. I can't go back, he and Yunyun. Tang Jiyuan walked away in low spirits. When the little girl closed the door, she secretly spat on him. This man is a scum. When the little girl went upstairs, she saw that Lin Yun had already gotten up and changed into her pajamas. The light green cheongsam was torn beyond recognition and thrown on the floor. Lin Yun said calmly, get rid of it. Don't let Mr. Zhao see it. The little girl's heart was filled with joy. She nodded and threw the bag away. She knew that Madam had Mr. Zhao in her heart. Chapter 459. Pei Chichi's life became even more difficult. With Meng Qingqing's actions, the Pei Corporation was on the verge of collapse. Fortunately, Pei Chichi had sold the land last time, and most of the shares were in her hands. Otherwise, the shareholders would have argued and she would have gone crazy. Little Wen went in and out of her office countless times a day, and there was no good news. Pei Chichi was so thin that she looked like she could be blown away by a gust of wind. Moreover, it had been half a month since she was with Tang Yu. In fact, Pei Chichi knew very well that if Meng Qingcheng really wanted the Pei Corporation to be finished, he did not need to put in so much effort. He was like a cat playing with a mouse. He wanted her to die, but he didn't want her to die so thoroughly. If not for her father, Pei Chichi would have given up long ago. It was not that she was willful and couldn't hold on, it was like a rookie fighting with an expert. The result was already expected. Little Wen stood there, feeling a little uneasy. Boss Pei, our reserve funds are almost used up. After this incident, some shareholders asked to withdraw their shares. Pei Chichi felt that her father was indeed a good man. The Pei Corporation had a little bit of assets, and the most valuable was this land. In the end, it was clearly his private land, but it was transferred to the Pei Corporation's assets. This was the last straw that broke her back, and it could also be said to be the last piece of driftwood that saved her. At least, she could escape unscathed, but she would become penniless. How could she not know what Little Wen said? She paused and held her forehead with her hand. I'll think of a way. Little Wen sighed in her heart. She had thought of everything she could think of. She was just short of selling herself. At this moment, Pei Chichi's cell phone rang. She picked it up and looked at it. It was an unfamiliar number. She picked it up, and it turned out to be Lin Jinrong's mother. Her voice was soft. Miss Pei, our old master wants to see you. Old Master Lin? Pei Chichi did not need to think to know that it was definitely not a good thing. So she pursed her lips. What's the matter? No one in the Lin family dared to talk about this. Mother Lin was probably forced to make this call. After some hesitation, she said in a low voice, Miss Pei, don't worry. The old man won't make things difficult for you. Pei Chichi smiled and said, if you want to see me, I have to see you. After hanging up, Little Wen said anxiously, we can't go. These people rely on their money to look down on others. Furthermore, now that Sheng Yuan is treating us like this, there's even less of a need to go. Pei Chichi smiled and closed the documents on the table. She looked at Xiao Wen and said, didn't you say that the Pei Corporation has no liquid funds? Little Wen was stunned for a moment. After a while, she said pitifully, yes, but Boss Pei, old Master Lin is so old. He could be your grandfather. Pei Chichi patted her with the document and snorted. Nonsense. Her eyes were clear and distant. Since he's looking for me, I naturally won't return empty-handed. Little Wen stammered, aren't you afraid of Mr. Tang getting angry? Pei Chichi picked up her bag. He's going to destroy the Pei Corporation. Why would I be afraid of him getting angry? As she said that, she pinched her face. Little Wen, look at how much I've lost. Why would I be afraid of him getting angry? Chapter 460. Pei Chichi walked straight to the door without turning back. She only said, "What do you think?" How would little Wen know? In any case, she had seen a kiss mark on Boss Pei's neck a few days ago. It was very suspicious. Is she with Mr. Tang again? Pei Chichi threw her bag into the car and calmed down for a while before starting the car. She followed the address given by Mother Lin and drove to the Lin residence. The Lin residence was located in a private garden in the suburbs. The old master liked peace and quiet. He also had the style of a big family in the past, so the garden was very big. It was the kind that one could get lost in it. Especially when there were 2 guards standing at the door, looking very imposing. Pei Chichi's car slowly passed through the gate and drove straight to the main house on Cotton Avenue. She did not think that she would have to make a few turns. After driving for about 10 minutes, she finally arrived in front of an antique house. It really looked like a paradise. Pei Chichi stopped the car and opened the door to get out. Mother Lin was already waiting at the door with a troubled expression. She actually did not want to get involved in this kind of thing. She was Jinrong's mother, and Lin Yun was Tang Yu's mother. Now that things had become like this, she might not be able to see her sister-in-law again if she did not handle it well. When Pei Chichi walked over, Lin Jinrong's mother still sighed in her heart. She was indeed a very beautiful girl who was worthy of Tang Yu. It was a pity that she was born by Zhao Ku. Pei Chichi wore a pair of white slim-fit pants with a pair of leather boots. She wore a thin sweater with a beige trench coat on top. She looked fresh and handsome. It was a little different from what Mother Lin had seen before. However, she was a little thinner. Mother Lin said in a low voice, "Follow me in." Pei Chichi followed behind her. It was an eye-opener. The place where the old master lived was like the palace. There were 3 entrances inside and 3 outside. The only thing missing was the palace maids and eunuchs. Mother Lin opened the innermost door. It turned out to be a room. Old Master Lin was sitting in front of a small table. There was an incense burner in front of him. The fragrant tea also emitted an unusual fragrance. This was a place where people could immediately calm down, and also make people feel reverence. Pei Chichi bent over and carefully sat opposite Grandpa Lin. Mother Lin's lips curled up in response to her actions. She had never seen anyone who dared to be so unrestrained in front of old Master Lin. Even the most pampered Tang Yu and Jinrong didn't dare to act rashly. Pei Chichi sat down and looked at old Master Lin. The old man was still dressed in a light grey robe, looking as antique as the house. He merely lifted his eyelids and instructed Mama Lin, "You go out first and guard outside. Don't let anyone in." Mother Lin lowered her eyes. "Yes." That attitude was really like the déjà vu of the great families of the past. However, Pei Chichi wouldn't fall for this. She wasn't related to old Master Lin, so there was no need for her to be so servile to him. After the door to the room was closed, old Master Lin first moistened his throat in preparation for the roar he was about to make. He raised his eyes. Those old but sharp eyes were tinged with a hint of anger. "Miss Pei, do you know why I called you here?" "I don't know. You can tell me now, old master," Pei Chichi said in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing. Old Master Lin had been snubbed. He had wanted to strike first and put this girl in her place. However, this girl wasn't afraid at all. Chapter 461. Among all of Tang Yu's relatives, everyone was afraid of old Master Lin the most. However, Pei Chichi felt that the easiest person to deal with was old Master Lin. Because he was honest, he would say whatever he had to say directly. He would not give you face, but he would not go overboard either. Old Master Lin's voice was deep. "This place is very well hidden. Lass, you have to know that even if I make you disappear here without a trace, no one will know." "Oh, I believe you. Even if my secretary accidentally finds out that I came to see you, you have a way to make her not say anything. However, old Master Lin, I think you're meeting me today to make me leave Tang Yu." Pei Chichi paused. "If I disappear? You're also a man, and you've been young before. Will you never forget me and remember me for the rest of your life?" Old Master Lin's old face darkened. Why was this lass so difficult to deal with? She was sharp-tongued and not cute at all. Being glared at by old Master Lin, Pei Chichi chuckled softly. Did I hit your sore spot? Old Master Lin huffed. Even if you're so impudent, I can't let you marry into my family. Pei Chichi smiled. So, why should I be afraid of you? It's not like you're letting me marry into your family. Old Master Lin was speechless. You're making things difficult for me and asking me to be submissive. Do you think I'll do that, Old Master? Pei Chichi's mouth was dry from all the talking, and she took a sip of tea. Old Master Lin had never suffered such treatment before. If she was a descendant of the Lin family, he would have flipped the table long ago. How could he tolerate such treatment? However, although this lass's words were disrespectful, she was standing on the right side of reason. They didn't like her, and yet she wanted her to be submissive? This was really unreasonable. Old Master Lin was angry, but he also admired her a little. If this lass was really submissive at this moment, he would look down on her. After thinking about it, he said directly, I heard that Tang Yu is still making things difficult for you. As for the rumors about the two little ones sleeping or not, the old master and a little girl couldn't say anything about it. Most of the time, it was his grandson who forced people to sleep. How could he say anything about it? Pei Chichi did not refute his question and lowered her head to drink her tea. Grandpa Sheng was an astute man. After observing Pei Chichi for a while, he knew what she was thinking. This lass was not simple at all. She must have come here with a motive. Without batting an eyelid, he said, if I give you a sum of money, leave Tang Yu. Pei Chichi's fingers froze on the teacup. She looked up at Senior Master Sheng and asked, what if I don't want money? The old man's eyes were sharp. Lass, enough is enough. Believe it or not, if you let me leave this place alive, I'll immediately look for Tang Yu. I'll tell him that I'm willing to be with him. Tomorrow, Pei Chichi smiled gently. Tomorrow, the whole world will know that I'm married to Tang Yu. That unfilial descendant wouldn't dare. Grandpa Sheng was furious when he heard this and lost his sense of propriety. This wretched lass was infuriating. She was really infuriating. Grandpa Sheng's temples were bulging. He looked like an angry frog. On the other hand, that wretched lass was still drinking her tea with a smile on her face. Grandpa Sheng stared at her for a long time before he said, you don't love him. Pei Chichi's eyes dimmed. Will you let me love him? Grandpa Sheng was speechless. After a long time, he sighed and said, lass, what do you want? If this gets out, people will laugh at me. The old man cared about his reputation, so he had to do his best in all aspects. Pei Chichi lowered her head and clenched her fists tightly. After a long time, she let out a long sigh and wrote down the marvel clause on the contract. She pushed it to the old man and said, you have to stamp your seal on this. Old Master Lin looked at her deeply. No regrets. Tang Yu is worth much more than this 5 billion yuan. Pei Chichi smiled faintly. I do regret it. Can you make me regret it? The old man was straightforward. After stamping the contract, Pei Chichi also signed it in duplicate. She didn't intend to stay any longer. She stood up and bowed. I still have to thank you. Chapter 463. In her life, there were not many things that she could grasp or possess. If she could protect her father's company, she would be comforted. At least, Pei Chichi was not a useless person. The old man was still sitting there without batting an eyelid. His voice was low and carried a hint of desolation. There's no need to thank me. Lass, don't be so cruel to Tang Yu. Pei Chichi smiled and did not say anything. In this world, there was only one Tang Xin and one Tang Yu. Tang Xin was too young and needed someone to take care of her. As for Tang Yu, he said to her, Pei Chichi, if you don't come to my side, I'll have to force you. She had never been able to hurt him. He was so strong and invincible. With just a flick of his finger, she would be doomed eternally. Pei Chichi knew that if Tang Yu found out about what happened today, he would probably want to strangle her to death. She didn't care. The piece of paper she signed just now was useless. If she was still so naive and took everything seriously, she would be too stupid. She was no longer the silly Pei Chichi. Even a fool would learn to fight with these people. If she took it seriously, she would lose. Of course, she knew that old Master Lin knew what she was thinking. It was just that everyone had a tacit understanding. Old Master Lin was only stopping her from throwing herself into Tang Yu's arms so quickly. If he wanted to help her, why wouldn't she accept? When she walked out, Mama Lin was looking at her with a peculiar expression. She walked over slowly and stood under a cherry blossom tree with Mama Lin. Pei Chichi pursed her lips. Is he still the same? Mama Lin naturally knew who she was asking about. She lowered her eyes and said with a slightly tense voice, he's still the same. After a moment of silence, she said, even old Master Lin doesn't have much hope. That's why he's putting his hopes on Tang Yu. In the future, one of Tang Yu's children might be adopted by the Lin family, and it will be under Jinrong's name. Old Master Sheng had mentioned this to Tang Yu last week, and Tang Yu had not objected. Mother Lin told Pei Chichi all this because she wanted to tell Pei Chichi that her identity was indeed not suitable to be Tang Yu's wife. She didn't say anything malicious, but just told her calmly. Pei Chichi didn't say anything. She just grunted and didn't ask to see Lin Jinrong. She was too ashamed to see Jinrong. As she walked outside, the sunlight scattered on her body, leaving specks of golden light. Lin Jinrong's mother just looked at the girl and felt that she was surrounded by loneliness. Her heart tightened and she felt a little sad. She thought that if all of this had not happened, this girl might have been Jinrong's wife and would have called her mother. But fate played tricks on people like this. Just like that, Mother Lin watched as Chichi's figure disappeared. She watched for a long time. Pei Chichi looked down at her own shadow as she walked. Pei Chichi, look, everyone is against you two being together. So it was right to say that they should separate. It couldn't be more right, but she was still sad and still missed him. Facing his slightly angry face, she always gave in disappointingly. It wasn't because she couldn't stand his brutality and rudeness, but because she still couldn't get tired of looking at him after seeing him thousands of times. She still missed him, still wanted him. Pei Chichi sat in the car and looked at the document. She pursed her lips and started the car. Only she and old Master Lin knew about this matter. No one else would know about it. Chapter 464. Sheng Yuan Conference Room. Meng Qingcheng briefly talked about the recent business situation of the Pei Group, and Tang Yu listened indifferently. He was confident in Meng Qingcheng's ability. Meng Qingcheng could take on the responsibility of a multinational company, let alone a small company like the Pei Group. After Meng Qingcheng finished speaking, Tang Yu said indifferently, now, Qingcheng, you can contact the person in charge of the Pei Group and discuss the acquisition. Discuss? Wouldn't it be a waste of time? It would be strange if Pei Xiaoqi didn't throw coffee in his face. Meng Qingcheng expressed that he didn't want to take the blame, but Tang Yu had always been a man of his word, so he could only laugh bitterly. There was another thing he couldn't understand. Did the company's executives not care? How much money did Tang Yu have to burn to pick up girls? Did they just ignore them one by one? Meng Qingcheng definitely didn't expect this. At first, there were naturally people who objected, but they were all settled by Zhao Yi. Zhao Yi wanted to be with Lin Yun now. He could understand Tang Yu's current actions, and he also regretted not taking action when he was young. If he had taken action earlier, perhaps Tang Yu would still be able to call him daddy. The meeting was almost over. In fact, there wasn't much to do. The main thing was that the master had asked me to do his private business. Just as the meeting was about to end, the door of the Sheng Yuan conference room opened. Everyone turned to look at the door. There was a faint smile on the corner of Tang Yu's mouth. She was finally here. Pei Chichi stood at the door, wearing a white suit on her body, like a fresh lily. Beside her stood Xiao Wen, and behind her were two younger men, who looked to be in their 30s. The point was, those two men were handsome. Although they weren't as handsome and noble as Tang Yu, their facial features were really good, and they were Pei Chichi's subordinates. Meng Qingcheng had an immoral thought in his heart. At this moment, Tang Yu should be exploding with anger. You have Sun Feifei, but look at how Pei Chichi has also brought Da Qiao and Xiao Qiao to demonstrate. Tang Yu looked at Xiao Ran and asked, Secretary Xiao, what's going on? He lowered his head and flipped through the documents again, saying indifferently, "If necessary, you can call security." Xiao Ran sighed. Who would dare to ask the security guards to chase away your precious baby? But the CEO really knew how to act. He looked cold on the outside, but in his heart, he wanted to throw his little darling on the conference table and do whatever he wanted. However, these were just Secretary Xiao's little thoughts. How could he dare to refute them directly? Tang Yu did not make things difficult for her. His gaze returned to Pei Chichi's face as he gestured for her to sit down. "Boss Pei, what's the matter?" "Just a little bit." Pei Chichi walked over, and the two beautiful men behind her also followed. They stood behind her, and one of them pulled out a chair for her. Everyone in the room was laughing at that scene. Only Tang Yu's face was black. Were these two special assistants or managers? Wasn't he too good-looking? Pei Chichi sat down, but she directly confronted Meng Qingcheng. Special Assistant Meng. Meng Qingcheng, who was called out, had been watching a joke at first, but now he looked confused. It was a disgrace to Sheng Yuan. Meng Qingcheng, who had been called out, coughed softly. "Boss Pei, looking for me?" Why did he feel like his skin was itching? "Please, just look for him. Look for your Tang Yu to play with." Pei Chichi smiled slightly. "I heard that Special Assistant Meng is preparing to go to the Pei Corporation to discuss the acquisition." Meng Qingcheng's skin went numb. Chapter 465. Pei Chichi smiled, and Big Qiao and Little Qiao immediately handed over a document. "This is the contract of intent that I signed with Marvel Corporation, which was put down by the Lin Corporation. The agency of Marvel for this season will be handed over to the Pei Corporation." Lin Corporation? Marvel? Marvel isn't. Meng Qingcheng was just about to say it when Tang Yu raised his hand to stop him. He looked at Pei Chichi and said calmly, "So, in addition, the Lin Corporation will reach an agreement with the Pei Corporation to cooperate with them without any restrictions." Pei Chichi smiled. "In that case, President Tang, you don't need anyone to translate anymore, right?" Tang Yu looked at her quietly, his dark eyes unfathomable. Pei Chichi couldn't understand him. Tang Yu wasn't annoyed either. He just raised his hand and gestured for the others to leave. Meng Qingcheng's lips moved. Tang Yu gave him a look and he went out. Only Big Qiao and Little Qiao that Pei Chichi brought were left. "President Pei, I have something to talk to you in private. You're not afraid that I'll do something to you, are you?" He leaned there, looking noble and aloof. He didn't look like the person who had done the rash thing to her in the Pei Corporation's conference room. Pei Chichi pursed her lips, stared at him, and didn't say anything. Tang Yu's eyes were filled with anger as he glanced at the two men. The two men were also practical. No matter how strong they were mentally, they couldn't withstand Tang Yu's stare. They quickly left in dismay. Only Pei Chichi and Tang Yu were left in the huge conference room. Tang Yu sat still and didn't move. He looked at her lightly. "Pei Chichi, have you become capable?" Needless to say, she had negotiated the contract with the Lin Corporation. In the entire Lin family, only the old master would look for her. As for the terms of their exchange, he wasn't interested in knowing now. Otherwise, he would want to strangle her. "Same here." Pei Chichi smiled. "If President Tang hadn't forced the Pei Corporation to a dead end, why would I have taken such a dangerous step?" The corners of Tang Yu's mouth curled up into a smile, and his gaze deepened. "Your idea is not bad. The Lin clan and Sheng Yuan clan were born from the same branch. But Pei Chichi, don't you regret it?" He bent down slightly and got closer to her. His warm breath brushed against her lips. "Perhaps, there's a bigger pit waiting for you," he kindly reminded her. Pei Chichi smiled indifferently. "I'd rather take a gamble if Sheng Yuan were to acquire it anyway." Tang Yu didn't say anything else and looked at her thoughtfully. His gaze was probing and bottomless. Pei Chichi didn't want him to see it clearly, so she got up. "President Tang, that's all. I'll leave first." He quickly pressed the back of her hand, and his eyes locked on hers. "Pei Chichi, are you here to declare war, or do you miss me?" The situation changed so quickly that Pei Chichi couldn't react for a moment. But his other hand had already cupped her little face, and he leaned over and kissed her deeply on the lips. The moment their lips touched, Pei Chichi's body trembled. She was a little intoxicated, but more than that, she was embarrassed and annoyed. But not only did she not push him away, but she reached out and hooked her arms around his neck, making the kiss deeper and hotter. Tang Yu couldn't help groaning, and changed the angle to make both of them more pleasurable. Pei Chichi enjoyed the kiss, but when he let go of her and was about to unbutton her shirt, she bit him hard. She really didn't go easy on him. Chapter 466. Pei Chichi tasted blood and laughed. Just as she was about to let go, she felt something pressing down on the back of her head. "You want to run away after biting me?" His voice was low and hoarse. He was holding her, and their faces were touching. That scorching heat made her blush and her heart race. At that moment, she realized that they were so close that their breaths were almost fused together. She was half sprawled on the huge conference table, looking extremely pathetic. "Let go of me." She was a little annoyed. Tang Yu's eyes were locked on hers, and his voice was a little bewitching. "Boss Pei, you bit me. How should I repay you?" "You kissed me forcefully." She was so angry that her face was very red. She was no longer the calm Boss Pei, but his little pet, Pei Chichi. Tang Yu chuckled. "Then I'll let you kiss me back forcefully, and then I'll bite you. Is that even?" That wasn't wrong, but it seemed wrong at the same time. Her head was spinning, and before she could react, she was kissed by him again. It tasted fishy, but he didn't care. He kept kissing her again and again. He kissed her until her toes were stiff. She opened her mouth slightly, and naturally, he could kiss her deeper. This kiss ended with Pei Chichi in pain. She gave a cry of surprise and almost jumped up. Tang Yu actually bit her. Their sticky lips finally separated, and she let out a shameful moan. He did bite her, but it wasn't hard, and there was no blood. Instead, it made her feel shameful and dissatisfied. She was lying on her stomach, and she was as soft as water. At that moment, Tang Yu chuckled hoarsely. "Boss Pei, do you want me?" Her face was red as she glared at him. Her breathing was messy, but it was also fragrant and soft. She was cute at that moment. Tang Yu felt that he had always fed Pei Chichi until she was full. He wanted her to taste the pain, even if he was about to go crazy from enduring it. His thin lips curled into a charming smile. He straightened his body and adjusted his clothes. Then, he looked at the petite woman. "Boss Pei, I'm sorry. I couldn't help myself just now." "This bastard." Pei Chichi gritted her teeth and got up. There was still a wave of passion in her watery eyes. "If Boss Pei needs my cooperation, I can reluctantly do it," he continued to speak coldly as if he was in a business negotiation. Pei Chichi finally calmed herself down and slowly walked towards him. Her tiny hands rested on his shoulders and her soft body nestled in his embrace. Her voice was also very gentle. Tang Yu, she was like a little kitten lying on his chest. No matter how strong Tang Yu's self-control was, he lowered his head and wanted to kiss her little mouth. Pei Chichi raised her leg. Tang Yu let out a muffled moan, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Fortunately, she held back a little. Otherwise, the Tang family would have no descendants. Pei Chichi was still lying on his chest. Tang Yu smiled bitterly. "Grandfather, why are you doing this?" "Of course I'm worried. Although you promised me a blind date, I feel that your mind is still on that girl. I have to be on guard." Tang Yu sighed softly. "I said I'll go, so I'll really go." Chapter 468. Tang Yu pursed his lips and did not say anything. Grandpa Sheng was unhappy. "Tang Yu, no matter how much you want it, it's impossible for you to be with that girl again." "Grandfather, are you that confident?" Tang Yu's tone was indifferent. Old Master Lin scoffed. "Take a look if you don't believe me. I believe that she has me in her heart," Tang Yu said calmly. This time, the old master was furious. "Tang Yu, you promised to go on a blind date before." Tang Yu smiled lightly. But I didn't say who I was going to marry, did I? This scoundrel. Was this scoundrel Lin Zhennan's outstanding grandson? Old Master Lin was so angry that he blew his beard and glared at him. He hung up the phone. At that moment, he actually felt like he was supporting that girl and helping Tang Yu train that girl. How was this a breakup? How was this hostility? It was simply flirting with each other. The old master was furious, but he could not do anything to Tang Yu. Very good. This grandson had used the words feigning obedience in secret to the extreme. Very good. Old Master Lin sighed. He hoped that the girl would hold on and insist on not being with Tang Yu. Perhaps after a few years, Tang Yu would slowly lose interest in her. However, how could it be lost? No matter what, Lin Zhennan would not change his words and decisions. Since he had promised that girl, he would not go back on his word. The cooperation between Marvel and the Pei Corporation was about to begin. For this, Marvel specially held a press conference and a rather impressive banquet. At the press conference, the CEO of Marvel interacted with Pei Chichi in a very gentlemanly manner. He was a man in his early 30s. He was quite young and handsome. His name was Wang Ziki, and he had a good reputation in the industry. He leaned forward and looked down. After a while, he shifted his gaze to Pei Chichi beside him. I look forward to working with Boss Pei. I believe it will be very enjoyable. After saying that, he placed the microphone next to Pei Chichi's lips and looked at her with a smile. He was quite gentlemanly. Pei Chichi also said a few words and then answered the reporter's questions. Boss Pei, Marvel is a subsidiary of the Lin Consortium. Does Boss Pei mind that the Lin Consortium and Sheng Yuan have a warm relationship? Pei Chichi smiled. Business is business. We only talk about benefits. I think personal feelings should be put aside. Immediately, a reporter caught the loophole in her words. Boss Pei, you said personal feelings. Do you still have feelings for Mr. Tang Yu? I think that's what we all want to know. Pei Chichi was stunned for a moment. She did not expect the reporters to be so tricky. However, Wang Ziki helped her out of the situation. He smiled and leaned closer. Boss Pei also said just now that personal feelings are personal and business matters are business. Today is the press conference for the cooperation between Marvel and the Pei Corporation. Don't ask too much about other things. Can you leave some personal space for Boss Pei? Thank you. Wang Ziki was said to be an expert in public relations. At that moment, he turned the situation around and gave the reporters a way out. Pei Chichi smiled at him to express her gratitude. Wang Ziki encouraged her and watched as she continued to answer the reporters' questions. Chapter 469. But after seeing Pei Chichi, who would reject such a beautiful girl? Even if he knew that it would never be possible, it was nice to see her every now and then. Men understood men the best. Wang Ziki could understand why Tang Yu was so dead set on Pei Chichi. He didn't tell Pei Chichi that he was considered Tang Yu's senior. When they were studying abroad, they were 3 years older. They knew each other, but they weren't close. Of course, when it came to Pei Chichi's beauty, he only admired it. He didn't have any possessive thoughts. Because once a woman loved Tang Yu, it would be hard for her to fall in love with someone else. No matter what, he had to make do. And Wang Ziki himself was a little proud. He didn't want to be made do. So he just admired it for a while. And when it came to the banquet, Wang Ziki was amazed by it. He was a very elegant man, not the kind of impatient pervert. Leaning in a corner of the banquet hall, he looked at Pei Chichi, who was dressed in a smoky grey evening gown. The top was of a xiongxiong design, and the layers of gauze didn't seem complicated at all. Instead, it looked light and graceful, especially the skirt, which was very elegant and retro. Because the color of the evening gown was dark, she used Dior 888 lipstick today, which made her delicate skin look even more like white porcelain. Wang Ziki wanted to go forward, but someone beat him to it. He was a little surprised that Qin Anlan from King Entertainment would appear here, but he quickly got over it. Marvel and King Entertainment had a lot of collaborations, but they were all done by their underlings. Wang Ziki and Qin Anlan didn't have much interaction. He just vaguely knew that Qin Anlan was ruthless, so they didn't have the intention to be friends because they had different paths. Wang Ziki saw Qin Anlan walk over to Pei Chichi. He turned his head and asked his secretary, "Did you give the invitation to King Entertainment?" His secretary said in a low voice, "Yes, he did. However, these social events are usually attended by Manager Lin. I don't know why CEO Qin came alone today." Wang Ziki gestured for her to say no more. The reason, he thought he knew. Women. If Qin Anlan could show up, so could Tang Yu. Wang Ziki's originally somewhat indifferent thoughts became even more indifferent. He thought that he might be able to enjoy a good show today. Thinking of this, Zhong Xian felt a little better. Qin Anlan walked straight to Pei Chichi. Pei Chichi was talking to Xiao Wen, explaining something seriously. As Qin Anlan got closer, he could see her face that was as beautiful as an oil painting more clearly. Really, he had never seen a girl's face that was so vivid. If she was willing to enter the entertainment industry, he could make her into a superstar. It was definitely not something that those popular young stars could compare to. She was so beautiful that her eyes could drown a man in them. Her every expression was a vivid painting. Decades later, everyone would still remember a girl named Pei Chichi. Finally, he stood in front of her and smiled. "Miss Pei." Pei Chichi looked up and saw Qin Anlan unexpectedly. Why was he here? Qin Anlan was dressed in a black formal suit. He was extraordinarily handsome, and he exuded a slightly demonic aura. He had always been the dream of the upper-class ladies, the person they wanted to sleep with, but he was also the nightmare of the daughters of wealthy families. Because falling in love with him would not end well. His gaze deepened. Only then did he know what it meant to be delicate. She was so delicate that almost no pores could be found. It was hard to find another person with skin as clear as ice. His eyes were filled with a deep desire that even he couldn't understand. All these years, Qin Anlan had had many women. He also had hopes for them. However, that was only a physical need as a man, not a psychological desire. Chapter 471. Qin Anlan actually wanted to hold her in his arms. Even if they didn't do anything, just hugging her like this was good enough. He thought so, and so he did. Not only did he want to hug her, but he also wanted to see Tang Yu's reaction if he hugged her now. Wouldn't it be interesting? As for his desire for Pei Chichi, he didn't want to magnify it, and he didn't want to think about it carefully. Because he didn't want to fall in love with a woman again. An arm suddenly wrapped around Pei Chichi's waist, and then she was brought into a warm embrace. Pei Chichi was stunned. Qin Anlan was doomed eternally. Everyone was dumbfounded. And Tang Yu, after pausing for a moment, sped up, and reached them in a few steps. He grabbed Pei Chichi's arm and pulled her to his side. She crashed into his embrace, and only felt that his embrace was a little hard. Then, her little head was pressed by him, and her little face was buried in his shoulder. She could smell his burning breath on it. She wanted to get up, but Tang Yu pressed her little head down tightly, and then he threw a heavy punch at Qin Anlan. That punch was very heavy. Even though Qin Anlan was prepared, he was still hit. His body fell to the side, and there was a burst of screams. The wine glass fell to the ground, and the sound of it shattering was very clear, followed by Qin Anlan's muffled groan. Tang Yu was really ruthless. He stood up with difficulty, so that he wouldn't fall even more embarrassedly. He stood up straight and looked at Tang Yu. He reached out to touch the corner of his mouth that was stained with blood, wiped it off, looked at it, and then looked up. His voice was a little lazy. Is this punch for Shen Lian back then, or for Pei Chichi today? Back then, when he slept with Shen Lian on Tang Yu's bed, Tang Yu didn't say a word, he just turned around and left. But now, he just hugged her, and he believed that Tang Yu could see that he was deliberately provoking her. With Tang Yu's cultivation and patience, he would usually be able to resolve it easily. However, it was obvious that Tang Yu cared about this little girl to the extreme, which was why he would throw a punch. For Tang Yu to have such a thing happen on such an occasion, it was unbelievable. It would definitely be on the hot search list tomorrow, and it would also blow up the relationship between him and Pei Chichi. You don't want to admit it. Then Qin Anlan would force him to admit it. Tang Yu still held Pei Chichi with one hand, not letting her see such a bloody scene. Pei Chichi moved uneasily in his arms. Her little hand clenched into a fist. She hit his shoulder and said in a low voice, "Tang Yu, let go of me." His body instantly tensed up, and he restrained his voice. "Boss Pei, I haven't congratulated you." As he spoke, he lowered his head and planted a light kiss on her forehead. At that moment, a camera flashed, and he didn't know which reckless person it was. The scene was silent. Even the people taking pictures were stunned. They didn't expect their cell phones to flash. It was in this silence that Tang Yu's voice sounded very elegant. "Boss Pei, this is a gift." The female employees covered their faces and almost screamed, "Such a gift, please give me a dozen." Pei Chichi just looked at Tang Yu, stunned. What did he say? This is a gift. Chapter 472. Tang Yu gently pushed her body. Meng Qingcheng, who was behind him, naturally took over and pressed her little arm down to prevent her from moving. "Meng Qingcheng, let go of me." She also forgot about the occasion and kicked the man behind her. Meng Qingcheng smiled bitterly. He had to press her down to prevent her from moving, but he couldn't get too close to her. Otherwise, what if Tang Yu finished dealing with Qin Anlan and then came to deal with him? For a moment, he was so tired that sweat appeared on his forehead. Tang Yu took off his coat and threw it to the attendant beside him. He looked at Qin Anlan calmly while calmly unbuttoning the cufflinks of his shirt. The women present wanted to scream again, not because they were afraid, but because, oh my God, are they going to fight? How could he be so elegant even when fighting? Mr. Tang's arms were so perfect and strong. If he hugged them, oh my God. Also, he was only wearing a shirt now, but his figure was so slender. Of course, President Qin was not bad either. Almost all the women were drooling. Only Pei Chichi almost screamed, "Tang Yu." Tang Yu was still slowly rolling up his sleeves. He didn't immediately turn his head when he heard that. Instead, he only asked calmly, "Boss Pei, are you worried?" Pei Chichi looked at him and Qin Anlan staring at each other like two wild beasts, ready to fight at any time. Her heart beat faster. She didn't care about the others or the occasion. She said hoarsely, "Yes, yes." She looked at him longingly, hoping that he would change his mind. Tang Yu smiled gently, turned around, and looked at Pei Chichi. His gaze was warm, and there was even a smile at the corner of his mouth. Pei Chichi was a little dazed. She could never be immune to him. Be good and stay there for a while. He sounded like he was coaxing a child. Then, his voice was cold. "Qingcheng, cover her eyes." Meng Qingcheng smiled bitterly and covered Pei Chichi's eyes with his hand. He could guarantee that the scene would be very, very violent. However, did Tang Yu forget that tonight's banquet was being broadcasted live? Tang Yu and Qin Anlan stood face to face. He smiled faintly and said, "If it was because of what happened in the past, I would have gotten it back then. I'm not a man who can endure it." Qin Anlan wiped his lower lip and sneered, "Then it must be because of Pei Chichi." To be honest, he had wanted to beat up Tang Yu for a long time. He had wanted to tear apart his nobility for a long time. For so many years, he had never been able to fulfill his wish. Today, he had only hugged Pei Chichi lightly, and Tang Yu had such a huge reaction. The two men were like two wild beasts fighting each other. The scene was so intense that it made people's hearts tremble. The women screamed again, this time because of the violence. Blood was like tap water. How was it not scary? Just that night, Tang Yu fell from the pedestal of nobility. Chapter 473. Tang Yu's white shirt was stained with blood, and so was Qin Anlan. Their faces were more or less covered in blood, and it was quite a sight to behold. Pei Chichi dashed over without thinking and hugged Tang Yu from behind. She murmured, "Tang Yu, stop hitting me." The moment her little hands hugged him, his anger was redeemed. He froze for a moment and looked down at the little hands that were hugging him. At this moment, Qin Anlan gave his handsome face a kick as well. That's why people say that Pei Chichi is a pig-like teammate. Tang Yu took 2 steps back, but he managed to stabilize himself. He stretched out his long leg and gave a vicious kick, almost causing the Qin family's millions of descendants to explode. Qin Anlan groaned in pain and squatted down, covering an indescribable part of his body. Tang Yu pressed down on Pei Chichi's hand with one hand to prevent her from escaping. He instructed Meng Qingcheng coldly, "Send President Qin to the hospital." Meng Qingcheng was also shocked. That kick just now was really vicious. He nodded and called for 2 more employees to send Qin Anlan away. The scene was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Pei Chichi wanted to break free, but it was already too late. Tang Yu pressed down on her little hand, his voice extremely hoarse. "Pei Chichi, do you care about me?" There were so many people around. She blushed and was anxious, afraid that he was injured too badly. She shook her head violently. Her body was dragged into his embrace, and she crashed into his embrace. Her waist was held tightly by his hands, and her whole body was pressed against him. She saw the blood on his body and was afraid that she would hurt him, so she only dared to struggle slightly. But Tang Yu's grip was even tighter. It was as if he had fused her into his own flesh and blood. He bent down slightly, and his face was very close to hers. "Pei Chichi, don't you care?" His bloody fingers slowly caressed her red lips, gently caressing them, making her lips look even more seductive. She stared at him blankly, her small hand trying to touch the wound on his face. However, she was instantly caught by him. That little hand was raised up high, and then he kissed her. A deep, deep kiss, a French kiss. Their bodies were pressed against each other, and their lips were occupied by him. She was burning hot, as though something was about to break free. Slowly, her small white arms wrapped around his neck. She leaned into his embrace and kissed him back. Everyone saw that it was the kind of kiss that made people blush and their hearts beat faster. However, the scene was very beautiful. Someone had already secretly taken a photo. Pei Chichi was intoxicated in his arms until Tang Yu released her little mouth. She was a little annoyed. She reached out and hit his chest with her small fist, but he caught it. "Come with me." Tang Yu's voice was a little tight. Pei Chichi opened her mouth in a daze, and then she came back to her senses. This was the collaboration dinner between the Pei Corporation and Marvel. Although she had regained her senses, her body was carried by Tang Yu. A standard princess carry. Her small body was carried in his arms, and they walked out of the banquet hall easily. When they passed by Wang Ziki, Tang Yu nodded slightly. "You take care of the aftermath." Wang Ziki smiled and didn't say anything. Pei Chichi wanted to struggle, but Tang Yu said in a low voice, "If you move again, I'll throw you down." She was so scared that she immediately hugged him tightly, her small face in his arms obediently. His heart softened instantly, and he reached out to touch her head, as though he was petting a little pet. She hadn't been so soft in a long time, and he hadn't been so gentle in a long time. Chapter 474. Both of them did not want to quarrel on such a night. Anyway, the trouble had already happened. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Now, they just wanted to be together and enjoy the quiet night. They didn't have time to go anywhere else, so they booked a presidential suite on the upper floor of this hotel. Meng Qingcheng was so considerate. Both the TVs and the medical kit were prepared. Tang Yu carried Pei Chichi into the suite and placed her on the sofa. She wanted to get up, but he pressed her down. "Wait a minute, your foot has pricked the glass." This fool. She didn't even know that her foot was injured when she tried to stop him. Pei Chichi only knew that her foot was pricked. She didn't feel any pain at first, but now she felt a piercing pain. Tang Yu let her sit down and looked at her deeply. She was very beautiful today, like a fairy in the forest, fresh and refined. It wasn't that he didn't understand Qin Anlan's gaze when he looked at her just now. Perhaps, even Qin Anlan himself didn't know that when he looked at Chichi, he was more passionate than when he looked at Shenlian. Therefore, he couldn't control his violence. He didn't regret it. He grabbed one of her feet and said in a low voice, bear with it. His big hand held her little foot, and his heart started to beat faster. He endured it and picked up a pair of tweezers to help her take out the glass. She felt a little pain, and her little hand hugged one of his arms a little reliantly. Even so, Tang Yu's heart softened, and he looked up at her. Her eyes were watery, and she looked at him pitifully. Under her gaze, Tang Yu nibbled on her little foot. She widened her eyes and watched as he took turns to pamper her 5 little toes. Pei Chichi never knew that her feet could be so sensitive. She bit her lip and meowed like a kitten. Tang Yu, don't kiss there. He finally looked up and looked at her with his clear eyes. His voice was unbelievably hoarse. So where do you want me to kiss you? She huddled there, trembling as pitifully as a small animal. Tang Yu slowly moved over and hovered above her. He said in a warm voice, Chichi, where do you want me to kiss you? She was trembling uncontrollably. Compared to his strength, she was extremely weak. They had agreed to be enemies, but in the face of such strong hormones, they couldn't even withstand a single blow. His breath was also hot as he moved closer to her little face. The tip of his nose started from her forehead and slowly moved downwards, bringing with it a touch of coolness and a touch of warmth. Slowly moving, it finally touched the tip of her nose, his thin lips pressed against her alluring little mouth. He didn't kiss her deeply. Where do you want me to kiss you, Chem? Pei Chichi's eyelashes trembled and she couldn't say a word. Her throat rolled uncontrollably. He leaned forward and stared at her with his deep eyes. Chichi, be good. Tell me, where do you want me to kiss you? Pei Chichi couldn't help but close her eyes. Her little hand clutched his shirt tightly. She was afraid that Tang Yu's gaze was enough to eat her up. His thin lips touched hers gently. Is it like this? She trembled and refused to speak. She bit her lip. That fragile look made him want to hug her in his arms and dote on her. Tang Yu looked at her deeply. After a long time, his body moved downwards. When he touched her, Pei Chichi screamed, Tang Yu, not there. Chapter 475. It wasn't that he hadn't kissed her before, but at that time, they were deeply in love. And now, she didn't expect that he would still do that for her. Her heart was beating so fast that it almost stopped. Her little hand grabbed his black hair, and her whole body felt like it was being fished out of the water. Finally, her fingers let go of him, and she collapsed weakly. Tang Yu held her in his arms and kissed her bit by bit, from her eyebrows to her mouth. His palms moved downwards, and he took her on the sofa. It was as turbulent as a storm. She was always afraid that he would be in pain, so he picked her up and placed her in his arms. Pei Chichi, come here. He whispered in her ear. Her face was so red that it looked like it was going to bleed, but she still couldn't bear to leave him. Even though she wasn't used to it, she still hugged him and tried her best to cater to him. After a long time, everything was quiet. Pei Chichi leaned into his arms and said softly, Tang Yu, let me get up. He lifted his body slightly and looked at her. He smiled faintly and said, Pei Chichi, I'm not in pain. But her heart was in pain. It was so intense at that time. How could she not be in pain? Pei Chichi propped her body up, and her little hand gently rubbed his chest. Does it hurt here? He looked at her exquisite face and beautiful features. Such a beautiful girl leaning in his arms and looking at him with a face full of worry, even a saint would melt. Tang Yu was no exception. He lay there quietly, letting her little hand light a fire on his body. After a while, he said hoarsely, it hurts there. He held her little hand and moved it downwards. Pei Chichi was so hot that she almost jumped up. She struggled to move her little hand away, but he wouldn't let her. She glared at him and said childishly, you beast. Chichi, if I can still resist a beautiful girl like you in my arms, then I'm worse than a beast. He laughed lowly. Although his body wasn't very satisfied, he was satisfied from the bottom of his heart. Pei Chichi's face turned even redder. Tang Yu held her little hand and couldn't bear to let her do that. Holding her hand, he kissed it and closed his eyes. Chichi, let's lie down for a while. Don't break up with me, don't tell me that I have a girlfriend. She looked up at him with his eyes closed, and a sense of emptiness passed through her heart. He didn't force her anymore. But why did her heart feel empty? However, Pei Chichi wouldn't ask such an embarrassing question. She leaned forward for a while before saying, "Tang Yu, I want to take a shower." He lowered his head to look at her and kissed her forehead. Then, he carried her and walked towards the bathroom. In the bathroom, he couldn't help but want her twice. This time, not only her, but Tang Yu was also exhausted. He carried her back to the bedroom. Although they were weak, neither of them fell asleep. She curled up in his arms and quietly looked at the endless night outside. "Tang Yu, will we have to separate again when the sun rises?" Her voice was soft, revealing a touch of desolation and fragility. After the orgy, what was left was emptiness. There was no tomorrow for her and him. After tonight, when the sun rose tomorrow, he would call her Boss Pei and she would call him Mr. Tang. She was lost. Tang Yu hugged her little body in his arms and looked at the night with her. He lowered his head and kissed her soft little neck. "Chichi, you can choose to stay forever." Chapter 476. Tang Yu did not force her. He pulled her into his arms and stroked her hair. Pei Chichi, sometimes, being stubborn isn't a good thing. She lay in his arms and felt his warmth. Suddenly, she felt aggrieved. She was a girl after all. Everyone knew that she slept with him without knowing why. Boss Pei was being unreasonable. That's why women shouldn't be spoiled. Her tears in his arms made his heart feel hot and wet, very uncomfortable. Tang Yu reached out and touched her long hair gently. He said in a low voice, "You can come back whenever you want." Hearing that, her tears flowed even more fiercely. Her little hands pounded on his chest and she even moved her mouth to bite him. Tang Yu's heart felt warm and wet as well. He could not describe the feeling in his heart. How could he not know the pain in her heart? Just as she said, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. There were some things about her that he could not understand. "So, Chichi, I'm willing to wait for you to think it through." She bit him. It was actually painful, but she endured it. She lowered her head to look at his fluffy little head and kissed it. Then, she rubbed it even tighter. She cried until she felt weak. She lay in his arms without moving, but her little hands were still tugging on his sleeve. Tang Yu pushed aside her messy long hair and looked at her. Her eyes and nose were red from crying, especially her pink eyelids. When she blinked, a tear rolled down. Tang Yu lowered his head and sucked the tear off. He sucked it gently and then moved to her alluring little mouth. As he kissed, he murmured, "Chichi, you're making my heart hurt." When he kissed her, she seemed to be shocked. Her body curled up even more. Then, she reached out and pounded on him indignantly. He let her do as she pleased. He let her get angry at him. He knew that he had not treated her well recently. It was very bad. It was almost torture. However, if he did not do that, she would fly away in the blink of an eye. He could not catch her. If that happened, he would be even more unreconciled and even angrier. He couldn't guarantee that she would still be in his arms, so safe and sound. Now, even if she was throwing a tantrum like this, he still felt that it was very wonderful. His voice was very soft. "Chichi, do you feel better now?" She did not speak but put her arms around his neck. This bastard only knew how to force her and make things difficult for her. Her little hands were still clenched into fists, and she pounded hard on his back, biting his neck unwillingly. "Okay, good girl, don't make trouble." Tang Yu patted her small shoulder, gently coaxing. But how could he coax his little girl at this moment? She was as bad as he was to her. She bit him and refused to let go. Her small body was fragrant and soft, and the bathrobe hanging on her body was really very alluring. "Baby, can you come down?" She was pestering him to the point that his soul almost left his body. Her voice was also a little unsteady. It was not that he did not want to hug her, but he was afraid that he would not be able to control himself if he hugged her. Pei Chichi refused and hugged and bit him tightly. The two of them were like conjoined twins. He felt helpless and sweet at the same time. The fight tonight was worth it. Actually, his cell phone kept ringing. It was from Meng Qingcheng and Old Master Lin. He roughly knew why. It was because he had slept with his enemy's daughter again. Chapter 477. Perhaps he would let down many people, but he didn't want to let down himself or Chichi. Such a young girl followed him, how could he bear to throw her away? At this time, Mr. Tang felt pity for the fairer sex. He hugged her and coaxed her gently, "All right, Chichi, be good." But she was always disobedient and clung to him. He had no choice but to scare her. "If you continue like this, I'll kiss you." That cute little face was buried in his arms. Her long hair had long been hopelessly scattered, messy like a little lunatic. He pulled her long hair and sighed as he looked at her beautiful little face. In the end, he kissed her lightly and said in a seductive voice, "Chichi, baby, do you want me to kiss you?" She pursed her lips and licked her lips gently, as if she was tasting him. Looking up at his beautiful lips, she leaned forward and kissed him again. Her intoxicated expression reminded Tang Yu of the one and only time Pei Chichi had secretly smoked. Now, she was infatuated with him. Such a discovery made him feel extremely satisfied, and he just looked at her indifferently. Pei Chichi sat up on her knees, her little hands still hugging his neck, and kissed him like a little beast. Tang Yu pressed her little head. "Pei Chichi, am I that easy to sleep with?" His thin lips moved close to her ear. "If you want to sleep with me, you need to get a marriage certificate." Pei Chichi was stunned, and then there was a trace of moisture in her eyes. He said, "Get a marriage certificate." Marriage? She looked up at him, helpless and vulnerable. She didn't dare. "Maybe, you can say that you love me." He searched for her lips, bit it gently, and said seductively, "Say that you love me, and I'll let you sleep with me once." Pei Chichi kicked him angrily, but she was carried into his arms. "Baby, or should I say that I love you, and I'll sleep with you once, okay?" He coaxed her shamelessly, his voice low. After that, Tang Yu said "I love you" 4 times and slept with her 4 times. After that, the man leaned close to the girl's ear and teased, "Good girl, do you want to listen anymore?" Pei Chichi covered her ears and curled up in his arms. Her body was still trembling. His large palm covered her small hand and hugged her whole in his arms. Although it was very soft, she heard it clearly. "I'll wait for you to come back." Damn it, she felt like crying again. Even though she knew that she shouldn't, that she was being too selfish, and that it would bring too much negativity to him, she still wavered. She wrapped her arms around his waist and buried her face in his chest. "Tang Yu, give me some time." He grunted. After a while, he smiled softly. "That's right, Sheng Yuan will not stop suppressing the Pei Consortium unless Boss Pei says I am willing now." All the good things had disappeared. Beast. She glared at him. She looked so cute even when she was angry. Tang Yu stroked her hair and smiled. "Chichi, actually, you're good enough. There's nothing about whether you're worthy or not. Also, don't say that you're Zhao Ke's daughter anymore. I don't care, so why should you care?" His eyes were full of warmth. It was the Tang Yu of the past. Pei Chichi bit her lips, her little hands carefully caressing his handsome face. "Tang Yu," she meowed pitifully like a kitten. It wasn't a small matter unless Tang Yu gave up on everything. But that was impossible. Tang Yu was the hope of both the Lin and Tang families. Tang Yu couldn't selfishly give up on everything. So in the end, he could only let Pei Chichi suffer. Meng Qingcheng understood Tang Yu's difficulties. He smiled and said, "Old Master Lin probably had a good impression of Pei Chichi a few days ago, but it was all gone after you slept with him tonight." Chapter 480. Meng Qingcheng stared blankly. What about now? Go out to face the reporters and then go back to the old mansion. Tang Yu smiled slightly. He said it very casually, but Meng Qingcheng did not think so. The old master was not that easy to deal with. He would definitely be furious about this. "Do you want to hide for 2 days? We'll talk about it after the limelight dies down," Meng Qingcheng said. He knew that Tang Yu was not afraid of the old master, but he respected him. The old master was used to being powerful all his life. He just did not want to rebel. What he did not know was that Tang Yu had other plans in his heart. Pei Chichi and the old master had a deal. She did not say it, but he could guess and was sure. He wanted to find out the truth this time when he went back. What's more, he took Chichi away in front of the whole world. The whole world probably knew that they slept together last night. He had to give the old master an explanation. Like what he said just now, he was the one who forced her. At that moment, he had to deal with the reporters first. He walked out of the hotel with Meng Qingcheng by his side. Behind him were Sheng Yuan's 4 bodyguards. At the entrance of the Four Seasons Hotel, all the cameras were aimed at Tang Yu, especially the suspicious marks on his neck. It was obvious that they were scratched by a woman when she moved her eyes. In an instant, the cameras were everywhere, taking pictures crazily. Mr. Tang, did you spend the night with Boss Pei of the Pei Corporation last night? The female reporter asked excitedly. Mr. Tang, according to the hospital, one of President Qin's ribs was broken last night. I want to ask, were you too ruthless? Did you do this because of Boss Pei? Mr. Tang, aren't you worried that it will affect your personal image or Sheng Yuan's stock price by doing this with President Qin? Tang Yu did not answer such questions. The reporters did not give up. Countless microphones were placed by his lips. Tang Yu only walked towards the black limousine, unbuttoning 2 buttons as he walked. When he got into the car, a reporter squeezed in front of him and asked excitedly, Sheng Yuan and the Pei Corporation should be enemies now. Why are Mr. Tang and Boss Pei still together? Tang Yu sat in the luxurious car, looking incomparably noble. Meng Qingcheng was about to close the car door when Tang Yu reached out to stop her. He smiled at the female reporter and said, "This is a sex scene." The female reporter was stunned. The shiny black car door had already closed in front of her. This was like 2 different worlds. It was as if Mr. Tang could tell her that this kind of complicated and unreasonable feeling was called love. Mortals would not be able to understand, or perhaps, this was the world of the rich. In the black limousine, Tang Yu asked Meng Qingcheng lightly, "Did Qin Anlan really break a rib?" Meng Qingcheng's small eyes drifted over, and she sighed softly. "Yes." Thinking about it, the flirtatious President Qin would probably not be able to touch women for a month. The small celebrities of King Entertainment would be lonely. Tang Yu did not say anything. That was because he would not be any better than Qin Anlan in a while. The car drove for about an hour before they arrived at the Lin family's old residence where Old Master Lin lived. Meng Qingcheng had been here several times, but he was still not used to it. Tang Yu got out of the car and coughed softly when he opened the door. "Wait outside. The scene would not be good later." Tang Yu was a proud man. Even Qingcheng did not want him to see him in a sorry state. Chapter 481. The servants opened the car door for Tang Yu. Tang Yu looked at the antique building in front of him, smiled faintly, and walked inside. Meng Qingcheng got out of the car and held onto the car door. He called out to him, "Tang Yu." Tang Yu turned around. "I wanted to stop you, but now it seems that there's no need." Meng Qingcheng pursed his lips, looking a little helpless. In the past, he knew that Tang Yu was deeply in love, but now he knew that for Pei Chichi, Tang Yu would humble himself to the ground. He could even betray the whole world. Pei Chichi had it hard, but Meng Qingcheng knew that Tang Yu had it even harder. Because he had to bear the hatred of 2 families. He had to consider the big picture. If it wasn't for his deep love, he would have given up long ago. Tang Yu looked at Meng Qingcheng and smiled. "Qingcheng, if you fall in love with someone one day, you'll know that giving up is actually harder than persevering." With that, Tang Yu walked straight into the main house. Meng Qingcheng cursed softly, "Isn't it just drinking chicken soup? Isn't it just falling in love with Pei Xiaoqi? You make it sound like I've never loved anyone before." But as he spoke, he felt a little sad himself. Meng Qingcheng's love, could never be said out loud. Because she was too young, because she was sick. There was very little he could give her. It wasn't that he was timid and afraid of responsibility, but he didn't want to scare her. Tang Xin was so young and innocent. If he said it out loud, would she think that he was a pervert? Meng Qingcheng chuckled, laughing at himself. He was no longer a pure man and woman, but his spirit was still pure. He actually had a pure platonic love, but the other party didn't know about it. Tang Yu entered the main house. There weren't many people in the hall. There were Old Master Lin, Lin Yun, and Jinrong's parents. Keeping a low profile like this could be considered as leaving some face for Tang Yu. Old Master Lin sat at the head of the table with a newspaper in front of him. The headline of the newspaper was the scene of his precious grandson kissing that girl. The old man could even see his precious grandson sticking out his tongue, under the watchful eyes of the public, under the bright sky, under the bright sun. How could he be so immoral? Not only that, but looking at Tang Yu's neck, he must have slept with that girl again. In order to sleep with a girl, he had fought with Qin Anlan at Marvel's banquet. Qin Anlan. In the past, they had only involved Shen Lian. If they were to fight this time, who knew how many people would speculate? Old Master Lin was most unwilling to have anything to do with the Shen family. He knew that Tang Jiyuan, that bastard, liked Shen Lian. Tang Jiyuan had no integrity, but the old man wasn't stupid. He would never let go of the relationship between Shen Lian and Qin Anlan. How could a good girl casually sleep with a man? What kind of propriety was that? Therefore, the old man didn't like Shen Lian very much. No matter how good her family background was, it was useless, because Old Master Lin was a straight man. Every wife had to be a virgin. Pei Xiaoqi. Tang Yu had let her down, but the wife he found in the future must be a virgin. However, everyone in B City was probably talking about Tang Yu and Pei Chichi last night. Which good family's daughter would be willing to marry Tang Yu? Just the thought of it was a bastard. Chapter 482. Hearing Old Master Lin's shout, the others trembled. After all, they were afraid of Old Master Lin. Old Master Lin looked at Tang Yu. Explain. Tang Yu's eyes drooped and he actually had a slight smile on his face. I can't explain this matter. How dare he talk back? Old Master Lin was so angry that he glared at him. Tang Yu chuckled. I was the one who fought with Qin Anlan. I was also the one who forced Pei Chichi to go to the hotel with me. He looked up at Old Master Lin. Also, I might make Pei Chichi pregnant. Lin Yun and Lin Jinrong's mother couldn't stand it anymore and wanted to retreat, just let the old pervert and the young pervert fight it out with each other. But Old Master Lin scolded them coldly. Why are you running? You don't teach your son well. You only know how to run. The two women were a little helpless and didn't dare to leave. They stood by the side and listened to Old Master Lin's scolding. Old Master Lin's heart was itching. Listen to what his precious grandson, who was so outstanding that no one could compare to, was saying. He was so happy to make a woman pregnant. Who was that girl? Did he forget his own mother? When Old Master Lin heard the words make a woman pregnant, he was actually happy, but he was afraid that Lin Yun would feel uncomfortable. If she didn't mind, she would have accepted Pei Chichi a long time ago. So, Old Master Lin decided to use the family rules. A long stick as thick as an arm was brought up by Lin Jinrong's father. Lin Jinrong's father looked at Tang Yu deeply. Sigh, the last time he used this family rule was 30 years ago. He didn't know if Old Master Lin was used to it. Besides, Tang Yu probably didn't rest last night. How could he withstand the beating today? However, Lin Jinrong's father didn't dare to disobey Old Master Lin's words, so he stood aside silently. Lin Yun was stunned. One had to know that the wooden stick was as thick as an arm, and Tang Yu was her favorite. How could she bear to let Tang Yu suffer like this? Regardless of anything, she went forward and begged, Dad, this is not appropriate. Then is it appropriate for him to sleep with that girl from the Pei family? Grandpa Sheng was so angry that he pushed Lin Yun away. He was standing up for her and protecting her son. Protect him all you want. Tomorrow, you'll have a grandson. Old Master Lin was enjoying himself. Old Master Lin was enjoying himself. The wooden stick, which was as thick as an arm, only took 3 strikes to turn Tang Yu's back purple. Although it was just a flesh wound, she still needed to be checked in the hospital. Lin Yun wiped her tears and let Meng Qingcheng help her out. She stayed behind. Old Master Lin looked at her and only spoke after a while. Yun, there's no one around now. What's there for us father and daughter to talk about? Lin Yun looked up with tears in her eyes. Only a father would be able to understand that kind of grievance. Old Master Lin sighed and reached out to wipe her tears. He scolded, "Look, you're already at the age of a grandmother, but you're still crying like a little girl. You weren't so fragile when you were young." After all, she was his youngest daughter. How could he not dote on her? But no matter how much it hurt, he had to be rational. Grandpa Sheng sighed. "I know that Tang Yu must have convinced you to do this. The rest is up to me, an unreasonable old stubborn man." Lin Yun's eyes were red and she didn't speak. Chapter 483. At this moment, Lin Yun was truly relieved. She sobbed on her father's shoulder and closed her eyes. "Dad, I'll think it through. If you don't like looking at that girl, then don't look at her. Let them live their lives. You can see her more in the future if you like her." Grandpa Lin patted her. "I think that girl is fine. Yun, you've suffered this time." Lin Yun called out Dad with tears in her eyes again. Old Master Lin patted her on the back and coaxed her like he did when she was young. "All right, be a good girl. Your son just helped you vent your anger. This brat did it on purpose. The little girl is asleep now, and you've vented your anger. He's trying to atone for her sins." Grandpa Lin had objected to this earlier. He had even called for Pei Chichi a few days ago, but seeing Tang Yu like this, it was impossible to break it off. Since it couldn't be broken off, he might as well fulfill it. Otherwise, it would cause even more trouble. That would be a lifetime of regret. Lin Yun cried. How could she not know that Tang Yu had suffered those few blows just now? This child had watched her lose her flesh and blood. He had always felt guilty towards her for being with Pei Chichi. He had taken those 5 blows on behalf of Pei Chichi. What a fool. She had given birth to a foolish son. But now she was happy. Tang Yu was like her, affectionate. "Dad, I'm happy and sad to see him like this. I'm afraid that Tang Yu will be like me in the future, destined to be sad." Lin Yun looked up with tears in her eyes. "I'm afraid that he will be like me, lonely." Grandpa Lin patted his daughter's shoulder. He won't. Tang Yu won't. You didn't see that girl being completely controlled by Tang Yu. If that girl didn't love Tang Yu, she wouldn't want to leave him. It was precisely because she loved him deeply that she didn't want to make things difficult for him. Lin Yun was silent for a long time before nodding. Yun, Dad is old." The old man reached out and stroked his daughter's hair. "I think Zhao Yi is not bad. If you like him, bring him back for me to have a look." Lin Yun's face was slightly red. She was almost 50 years old and no longer a little girl, but now that she was shy, it was still very moving. No wonder Tang Jiyuan was very moved. She didn't say anything. The old man knew what was going on and felt relieved. He chuckled a few times and patted her again. "I heard that Tang Jiyuan, that bastard, is still pestering you. If something like this happens again, I'll talk to him. I'm sure he won't have the guts to do it." As for Tang Jiyuan, the old master looked down on him. Whether it was towards Lin Yun or Zhao Ku, who had committed the most heinous crime, Tang Jiyuan was extremely unmanly. Let's not talk about Yun's matter. After so many years, let's talk about Zhao Ku. After the incident, Tang Jiyuan immediately cut off all ties with Zhao Ku. He did not care about the poor child Tang Xin who was caught in the middle. Of course, he wouldn't say these words to Lin Yun. He thought that Lin Yun also had her own considerations and would not do anything stupid. Lin Yun softly agreed and the old man's mood improved. "I think Zhao Yi is not bad." "Dad." Lin Yun looked at him reproachfully. "Can we not talk about this? I'm just worried. Jinrong's parents and the Lin family won't be able to get over this." Tang Yu and Pei Chichi couldn't hide and secretly get married, could they? Chapter 484. When Tang Yu was admitted to the hospital, he stayed next door to President Qin in the VIP ward of Shengyuan Hospital. When the black limousine drove into the hospital, it was bustling. The reporters surrounded Shengyuan Hospital. As Tang Yu had just left the hotel in the morning, it was obvious that he had indulged himself for a night. Now that he was hospitalized, did he lose his virginity as a man? Tang Yu got out of the limousine. Although his back was in pain, he endured it and went straight to the ward. After a check, there were no injuries to his bones or internal organs. However, his back was so bruised that it was turning purple. Old Master Lin was old but strong. After the check, he straightened up and smiled. "Mr. Tang, it's nothing serious. It's just a superficial wound. You don't need to be hospitalized. You'll be fine after resting for 3 to 5 days. Just don't lie in bed for too long." Tang Yu put on his shirt slowly and elegantly. He looked at Director He. "Are you sure?" Fine beads of sweat formed on Dean Hao's forehead. He didn't quite understand what Tang Yu meant. Wasn't it a good thing that it was fine? Wasn't it better that he didn't need to be hospitalized? Why doesn't Mr. Tang look happy about it? Director Hao did not understand. He stole a glance at Meng Qingcheng, hoping to give him some hints. Meng Qingcheng laughed and sighed in his heart. Tang Yu was such a tsunder. Didn't he just want to make Pei Chichi feel sorry for him? He was injured and tried to hurt himself. If no one came to comfort him, wouldn't he have been beaten for nothing? However, how could Tang Yu say that? So, Meng Qingcheng coughed. "Director Hao, I think it's quite serious. It's better to be hospitalized for a few days." Director Hao was stunned. Then, he understood. He wanted to be hospitalized. That was easy. So, he immediately arranged it and asked carefully, "Mr. Tang, how many days is suitable for him to stay here?" Tang Yu looked at him. Director Hao immediately said, "Can we stay for half a month first?" At that moment, Tang Yu buttoned up his shirt and said calmly, "You're the director. You can stay as long as you want. Does that mean you're satisfied?" The principal wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and smiled. "Half a month then. We'll see how things go after that." He quickly left and closed the door. Meng Qingcheng turned around and laughed. "Didn't you just want Pei Xiaoqi to send chicken soup over?" Tang Yu glanced at him. "Ask Xiao Ran to bring the company's affairs over. I'll handle it here." Meng Qingcheng sternly said, "Although it's just a superficial wound, it looks quite serious. You should rest for the next 2 days. Don't overwork yourself." How could Tang Yu not hear the hidden meaning in his words? He glanced at him and said, "All right, you can go now." Meng Qingcheng snorted. "Are you sure?" Tang Yu tossed something over and said proudly, "Make an announcement, understand?" How could Meng Qingcheng not understand? Isn't it just acting pitiful? If Pei Xiaoqi saw that Tang Yu had suffered such a serious injury because of her, would it be appropriate for him not to come and take a look? Meng Qingcheng chuckled and left. After he left, Tang Yu felt a burning pain on his back. The old man had indeed not shown him any mercy. He was already very lucky that his skin hadn't split open. He lay down on his side, feeling uncomfortable. He covered his eyes with his hand and silently missed her. They could be considered to have reconciled. Although Chichi hadn't completely relented, he could feel that she wanted him. However, the girl was thin-skinned, and he wanted her to beg him. Chapter 485. Meng Qingcheng had done a good job in public relations. Pei Chichi soon got to know that Tang Yu had been admitted to the hospital. On the news report, Tang Yu got out of the black limousine at the entrance of Shengyuan Hospital with a pale face. Although he looked fine, she could tell that his body was tense and his brows were furrowed, as though he was in great pain. Pei Chichi hugged the bucket of noodles and was stunned. She looked at Tang Yu just like that. After a while, he walked into the hospital, and she couldn't see him anymore. The news report said that he would be hospitalized for half a month. Half a month. Pei Chichi put down the bowl of noodles and stared at the television in a daze. Should she go or not? She bit her lip so hard that it almost bled. Then, she jumped up, grabbed a coat and ran out. Late at night, she drove the white Chimay to the inpatient department of Shenyuan Hospital. Sitting in the car, she hesitated for a long time. She knew what it meant when she got in. It meant that she had bowed down to him. It meant that she was with him. It meant that she was willing to face everything that she didn't want to face. But she still wanted to see him. Her fingers were trembling and weak. But in the end, she opened the car door firmly and ran towards the elevator. She pushed open the door of the ward. Although it was past 10 p.m., the patient inside was still awake. Tang Yu was lying on his side with a business magazine in his hand. When he heard the door open, he looked up at Pei Chichi. His dark eyes were calm and emotionless. There was no one else in the huge ward except for him. Pei Chichi stood at the entrance, pursing her lips and looking at him. She was a little stubborn and didn't speak first. Gradually, Tang Yu's eyes were filled with warmth. He looked at her and smiled. "Why don't you come in?" He put the magazine aside. Pei Chichi saw that he was lying there motionlessly. She walked over and squatted in front of his bed, looking up at him. "Where are you hurt?" Tang Yu didn't say anything and just looked at her deeply. Then he smiled. "Is overindulgence considered an injury?" Pei Chichi bit her lip. "You're still spouting nonsense at a time like this." Tang Yu's gaze fell on her little face, and his voice deepened. "Are you worried?" She grunted softly. Tang Yu's hand suddenly grabbed her and caressed her soft little hand. He said very casually, "She was punished by the old master according to the family law." Her eyes widened, her gaze searching his body eagerly. He stopped her from moving. "The wound is on the back." He said it lightly, but Pei Chichi insisted on seeing it. The injury wasn't serious, and he didn't need to stay in the hospital for half a month. "Let me see." Her voice was trembling. He did not speak, nor did he stop her. After a while, Pei Chichi knelt in front of him and carefully rolled up Tang Yu's shirt. She saw that his back had turned purple. His skin was not the usual bronze color, but the color of jade, which made him look even more frightening. Those few black and purple marks seemed to have pierced into Pei Chichi's heart. Her little hand touched the marks, and her voice was a little shaky. "It must be very painful, right?" She looked up. "Why did the old master hit you?" Tang Yu asked her to put down his shirt. She obediently half knelt in front of him so that he could rub her little head. He smiled faintly. "It's probably because I slept with you for a night." She was stunned, and then her face turned a little pale. Chapter 486. He had finally managed to catch his Chichi, and she was finally willing to come and see him. His face rested on her shoulder, and his voice was low and hoarse. "Chichi, don't run away." At this moment, Tang Yu's voice was actually very fragile. He hugged her with one hand and stroked her long hair with the other. "You have to believe that I am in a much more difficult and painful situation than you are. Facing my mother and the Lin family, I am even more helpless than you are." His fingers stroked her little head gently. "But, I don't want to be without you. I don't want Sun Feifei or Li Feifei." It was rare for him to confess so emotionally. "I know that my mother has looked for you, but she is no longer against it. Of course, I can't say that she is in favor of it." Her body froze in his arms, and she could hardly believe what he was saying. "Old master beat me up. He was probably embarrassed into anger and couldn't do anything to me." He smiled bitterly, held her little face, and looked at her seriously. "Chichi, I have never done anything stupid. This is the first time I have been beaten up like this." It was also the first time he had fought with Qin Anlan. So many firsts, all because of a girl named Pei Chichi. "Chichi, if you continue to run away, I don't know how much longer you can hold on." He looked at her deeply and seriously. He admitted that this was a threat. Although it was a little despicable, it was necessary. Pei Chichi looked at him, and there was a trace of helplessness in her eyes. Tang Yu, I haven't thought about it yet. Then think about it now. He patted her little head and said very generously. Pei Chichi wanted to cry. Now that she thought about it, could he allow her to regret it? However, she really felt sorry for him. It must be very painful to be beaten up, right? When she moved, he hissed and frowned in pain. Does it hurt? Her heart softened, and she touched his back gently with her little hand and asked softly. At that moment, her hair was let down, and she was wearing a pair of tight-fitting jeans and a grey sweater. She looked indescribably fresh and attractive. She was not Boss Pei, but Chichi. His Chichi. Tang Yu sat up and leaned against the headboard. It won't hurt if you're here. Her little face blushed a little. Her little face was quite lovable. Tang Yu was a little moved. He hooked her chin with his finger and teased her. Pei Chichi, you're blushing. She turned her head and snorted softly. You're injured to this extent and you're still thinking about this. He was about to joke with her, but as she spoke, she began to cry. Then the little person curled up in his arms and cried like a little shrimp. Tang Yu's heart softened and he felt helpless. He caressed her little face with his large palm. Pei Chichi, you're not a child anymore. People will laugh at you if you cry like this. She lay in his arms like a rascal and buried her face in his arms, right in his lower abdomen. Her fluffy hair tickled him a little and made him a little restless. His voice was unbelievably hoarse. Chichi, I'll cry, she murmured childishly, and buried herself a little deeper into the bed. Tang Yu went through all the major development projects in Shengyuan High School in his mind. Only then did he not pull her hair and force her little mouth to do something indescribable for him. This little bastard. Chichi, I'm the one who's injured. Why are you crying? He smiled impatiently and finally pulled her out. Pei Chichi lay in his arms and looked at him pitifully. That little look really made him want to kill her. Chapter 487. He looked down at her dark head and smiled lightly. Chichi, what's so good about me? Even he himself felt that it wasn't good. It wasn't like he hadn't wavered in his relationship with her before. He even had the thought of raising her outside for the rest of her life. That way, it would be the best of both worlds. But in the end, he loved her and couldn't bear to let her suffer like that. Pei Chichi didn't say anything. Actually, she knew both his good and bad points. She buried herself in his arms and said softly, Tang Yu, you know you love me. She was as proud as a baby. He couldn't help but laugh and stroked her long hair. Nonsense. I don't love you at all. You shameless little thing. Pei Chichi whimpered and threw herself into his arms. She said softly, you just love me. What about you, Pei Chichi? He pressed her down and didn't let her go. His lips pressed against her little ear. Are you going to let me love you? She was a little dazed. After a long time, she looked up at him. His expression couldn't be more serious. Pei Chichi replied with an "oh" and then asked, Tang Yu, does it hurt? He grabbed her hand. Pei Chichi, don't avoid the question. She still looked at him pitifully. How are you going to love me? Like this. He chuckled and kissed her on the lips. Her little mouth was bright red, rosy, and alluring. He only took a light sip and left, his dark eyes locked on hers. Like this. Her. She blushed and hit him. Tang Yu, don't forget the injury on your back. She was stupid, but she could tell that it was probably just a superficial injury. Tang Yu sat up and hugged her whole in his arms. He said in a low voice, then you stay on top. She lay in his arms and bit him hard. Tang Yu laughed. I lied to you. At this moment, the little thing in his arms was indescribably soft. He was overjoyed and in disbelief. He even wanted to verify it right now. But thinking about it, if he impatiently asked for that kind of thing at this moment of mutual confession, his little fellow would definitely be angry. He endured it and gently kissed her little neck. Then he said in a hoarse voice, Chichi, if you don't let go, I might have to call the doctor. She jumped in fright and immediately left his embrace. She asked pitifully, does it hurt? He grunted and lay on his side looking at her without saying anything else. Pei Chichi pursed her lips. After a long time, she said softly, "Actually, you don't have to work so hard." Yes, he forced her. Many of the things he did were terrible, but she knew that his pain was no less than hers. He just wanted her back. Obviously, he could have had a better life, could have been more perfect. Tang Yu patted her. "If you like him, then so be it. What can you do about it?" She didn't say anything. She just hugged his waist, her fingers tugging on the fabric of his shirt tightly. "All right, don't cry anymore." He stroked her little head and said seriously, "Chichi, I'm a little hungry." In order to wait for her to come, Mr. Tang Yu didn't allow anyone to bring him food. He was so arrogant. Up until now, he had been hungry for more than 10 hours. Pei Chichi looked down at the time and then glared at him. "Tang Yu." He smiled and shifted his body. Then he lay on his stomach. "Be good and go cook." This was a VIP ward. It had everything. Chapter 488. Mr. Tang, who had always been noble, called out in a low voice, "Chichi. Who asked you to be so childish?" She still rubbed it gently and blew on it before getting down. "I'm going to cook." Just as she was about to leave, he caught her little hand. His grip was a little tight. Pei Chichi turned her head and looked at Tang Yu. "What's wrong?" His gaze was fixed on her little face for a long time before he said softly, "Nothing." Pei Chichi did not leave immediately. After a while, she lay in front of him again. "Tang Yu, I knew you liked me." She looked at him with her eyes wide open. Tang Yu patted her. "Shameless little girl, go and cook." She went obediently. On such a night, she was unbelievably soft. She had never thought that one day, she would make such a decision and have the courage to be with Tang Yu. But she really did not want to miss out on him. Chopping vegetables, boiling soup, stir-frying vegetables, all the dishes were fragrant and soft. A bowl of rice for 2 people. 1 bed, 2 people sleeping together. Late at night, Tang Yu sat with his shirt down to his waist. Pei Chichi knelt behind him with a medical kit in her hand. She looked at the bruises and her heart ached. "Tang Yu." She called him like a kitten. He grunted. "Chichi, you can apply more force." She did not dare to apply force. His back was already sweating even though she was applying the medicine carefully. It was clearly painful, but she had to pretend that nothing was wrong. She pursed her lips and did not dare to make a sound. But Tang Yu still knew that she was crying. He smiled warmly. "Chichi, kiss me and it won't hurt anymore." He was actually just teasing her, but he didn't expect that his little one would really, very seriously climb onto his shoulder, and then he felt her little mouth gently touching his back. It was a little cold and a little hot. "Chichi." His voice was unbelievably hoarse as he called her name. Pei Chichi nodded and kissed him a few more times. Her voice was a little warm. "Does it still hurt?" Tang Yu pulled the little thing over and held it in his arms. Her hair was as black as ink, and her face was at the prime of her youth. At this moment, she was blooming in his arms. Tang Yu lowered his head slowly and kissed her lightly. He gently sucked on her rosy lips and touched them lightly. His scorching hot breath blew on the side of her face. The warmth of his body and the bulging muscles made her blush and her heart race. Pei Chichi bit him, her expression a little fragile. "Tang Yu." He hugged her like a little doll, just like how he used to hug her. He coaxed her gently. "Be good, I'll just kiss you. I can't do anything I want to do." She looked at his Adam's apple, which was rolling up and down. It was especially sexy. Moreover, she could clearly feel the changes in his body. Pei Chichi bit her little mouth, buried her face in his arms and said a few words in a low voice. Tang Yu closed his eyes. "Chichi." She had already buried her head. He never knew that she had such a hobby. He wanted to stop her, but there were too many things piling up and he could not control them. The moonlight was clear and the hospital bed was messy. She bent over in his arms, her back pressed against his slightly hot body. Tang Yu patted her back gently, coaxing her to sleep as if he was coaxing a baby. Chapter 489. Tang Yu, can we really be together? In the darkness, Pei Chichi's voice was very soft and fragile. He reached out to touch her little head and pressed his chin against the top of her head. Yes, Miss Pei. She rubbed her little face against him a little proudly and didn't say anything else after she let out a cry. Her face was a little warm against his arm, and her back was also indescribably warm. She felt like crying again. Her voice was a little dry and hoarse. Tang Yu, I think I'm very selfish. He hugged her tighter, holding her small body in his arms, kissing her again and again. I only hope that you can be more selfish. She turned around and hugged him, hugging him like a child. You're already so big, but you're still like a child. His voice was warm as he looked down at her little head. Pei Chichi's voice was vague in his arms. Tang Yu, I just want to feel your warmth. He did not say anything else. He just hugged her and kissed her little neck. When she was about to fall asleep, Tang Yu leaned against her ear and said in a low voice, Chichi, thank you for being so brave. She woke up and hugged him tighter. She was very restless in his arms. Chichi, if you continue like this, I can't guarantee what will happen. He patted her restless little body. However, she was still hugging him and was very restless. Tang Yu was very distressed. It was sweet and sour at the same time. After a while, he coaxed her. Chichi, can you sit on me? No. She laughed in his arms, and her little hands were on fire as she teased him. Tang Yu finally knew that she was doing it on purpose. Chichi. He called her name in a low voice, and there was a clear light in his dark eyes that was unique to men when they were asking for sex. Even she felt a little weak at the knees when she saw that. Then, she hugged him shamelessly. Tang Yu, you're injured. Then why are you still teasing me like this? He angrily bit her. He really wanted her. The naughty baby whispered in his ear for a while, and the injured man couldn't fall asleep even more. He gazed at her with his clear eyes and pinched her little face. Don't go back on your words in the future, she howled and hugged him. Tang Yu, when you were fighting with Qin Anlan at all costs, when you were being punished by the family rules, if I could still remain indifferent, I think I don't love you enough. Now, I'm back. And you still love me. She leaned into his chest, her little hand lightly touching his face, and then burying herself in his chest again. Tang Yu, let's live together with Tang Xin, okay? He reached out his hand to stroke her long hair and lightly grunted. When he looked down again, she had already fallen asleep. Really, a child. In fact, she always pretended to be old, but she was still only 21 years old and could be considered a child. Chichi, I'm sorry. He hugged her. I'm sorry for being so bad to you before. Early in the morning. Grandpa Lin came to see his seriously injured grandson. The nurse opened the door and said softly, Mr. Tang is not awake yet. He was not awake. It was not that he was not awake, but he was still sleeping soundly with a baby in his arms. Lin Yun also came with Grandpa Lin, and the two of them never expected such a scene. However, they were both 1,000-year-old foxes. They immediately guessed why Tang Yu insisted on being hospitalized. Chapter 490. Lin Yun took Tang Yu's face into consideration. Moreover, there was still Pei Chichi. She was still a young girl. Although she still had that thing in her heart, she never liked to embarrass others. However, old Master Lin didn't have that kind of moral integrity. He hit the ground with his walking stick. Is this a hospital or a hotel? Tang Yu was the first to wake up. The moment he opened his eyes, he saw his grandfather looking at him furiously. Lin Yun also looked at him helplessly. He sighed inwardly and pressed the little person in his arms down, revealing only her pointy little head. Pei Chichi woke up and didn't dare to make a sound when she heard the noise. She felt even more uncomfortable. Old Master Lin wasn't someone who could be easily dismissed. He looked at Tang Yu coldly. You dragged a little nurse to your bed just because you're staying in the hospital? Tang Yu smiled and patted Pei Chichi, indicating for her to lie down. He got up and put on his clothes. He calmly buttoned up his shirt. His elegant demeanor made old Master Lin even angrier. Go to work when you've recovered. You're embarrassing yourself here. You should sleep in the hospital, Old Master Lin said as he looked at the little girl on the bed. He was feeling smug. Wasn't that lass usually fierce with him? No matter how thick-skinned she was, once she was on his grandson's bed, no matter how fierce she was, she wouldn't be able to be fierce anymore. Looking at Old Master Lin's flushed face, Tang Yu thought, last night, he said that Chichi was like a child, but Old Master Lin was more like a child now. He smiled and looked at Old Master Lin. He said softly, let's go sit in the small living room outside. I'll get Chichi to wake up. His expression couldn't be more natural. There was a hint of gentleness in it. Old Master Lin touched his nose. This grandson of his was going to be eaten by that girl. He glared at Tang Yu and went out with Lin Yun. As soon as he went out, the nurse from before said sternly, Elder Lin, don't humiliate us nurses in the future. We won't sleep with you. Old Master Lin froze for a moment before chuckling. He knew that his words had been rude. Only then did the nurse give up and go out. Lin Yun helped Grandpa Shen sit down. Only the two of them were left in the living room. Grandpa Shen looked around and said in a low voice, I know I'm making things difficult for you. Look at the situation. Your precious son is disappointing. He probably can't sleep with anyone else other than this girl. He said it casually, but Lin Yun took it to heart. Others might not know about Tang Yu's problem, but as his mother, she knew. Pei Chichi was indeed the only woman Tang Yu could touch now, in case, seeing that her expression was strange, Grandpa Sheng didn't say much and just waited. After a while, he roared into the room, are you putting on or taking off your clothes, Tang Yu? His words were crude. There was no helping it. Grandpa Sheng had been out when he was young, and he had never changed his temper. With this roar, the two little ones came out in a short while. Pei Chichi was naturally uncomfortable. Fortunately, Tang Yu held her in his arms and said a few words casually. Then, the matter was over. They didn't talk about marriage. It seemed too deliberate, and it wasn't the right time or place. Grandpa Sheng didn't say much. He just looked at Tang Yu meaningfully. Didn't you take the jade pendant from me last time? Your grandmother left a lot of things for you. She said that it would be for your wife in the future. I don't think it'll take up space with me. You can take it with you tomorrow, so I won't have to worry. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.